I'm Madeline Dietrich, a senior Pathwork helper from Ottawa, Canada. At our first online international conference in November, I'll be presenting a workshop called Pleasure, the Living Experience of God. The Pathwork lectures offer rich and unique teachings about pleasure as an intricate element of our spiritual development. But we don't often consider pleasure a legitimate aspect of our spiritual experience. And many people hold misconceptions and confusion about what pleasure really is. So in this workshop, you'll get a deeper understanding of the guide's teachings about pleasure, its spiritual significance, and ways to apply the teachings to your daily life. But as background to this workshop, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my journey in this focus of pleasure. I began studying the Pathwork in 1984, and at that time I was a wife, a mother of 3 children, and I worked as a somatic therapist. Eventually, I trained as a Pathwork helper, and for many years, I've been supporting individuals and groups in Pathwork, and I also teach on the faculties of helpership development in Canada, the US, Japan, and Israel. But my particular interest in pleasure took a deeply personal turn in 1997 when my middle daughter was diagnosed at the age of 14 with bone cancer. She was in treatment for a year and a half, but she died the following year. During her illness and at the time of her death, the Pathwork teachings and my Pathwork community were such a lifeline for me. But it was after her death and my journey with grief and trauma and finding renewal that the topic of pleasure really came into the foreground. As the guide calls it, the healing balm of pleasure in its myriad forms was a resource, a spiritual resource I drew from to live through the many dark and challenging times following her death. We need the healing balm of pleasure to weather the inevitable storms of life, and yet during those times, even the idea of pleasure can feel incongruent and often very inaccessible. And yet in the Pathwork teachings, we're invited to be able to hold pain and pleasure side by side. In the Pathwork process, we learn to accept pain and work with it constructively. This is an essential element of our spiritual development. But we also need to learn to open to and expand our capacity to embody pleasure. This is central to our spiritual growth as well. These two aspects are deeply interwoven, and the guide's teachings hold unique wisdom about this human phenomenon of pain and pleasure. Through this focus, I've surely come to know my own lived experience of God. God for me is the goodness of light, in its myriad forms that is available to us in any moment, no matter what else is happening at the same time. But we do have to learn and develop the eyes to see it and the willingness to take it in, even if something very difficult is happening at the same time. I call my work Unlock Pleasure, and you can find out more information about that at my website, madelinedietrich.com. There you'll find 5 years of blog posts on the topic of pleasure in all its aspects, and also other resources to help you explore this topic for yourself. I look forward to seeing you in November at the online conference, and thank you very much for your time today.